Secrets can be dangerous, and in my line of work, they can be deadly. I'm Paul, a private investigator with South Wales Private Investigations. This isn't just a job for me, it's who I am. I've spent years helping people uncover the truth. This case is about Claire, a woman who had gone missing, and her story turned out to be a lot more complicated than it first seemed. It all started with a call from her husband, Mark. Claire had been missing for 4 months. The police had given up. Mark sounded broken, his voice low and strained. "I need your help," he said. I've heard those words more times than I can count, but something in his tone made me pay attention. He kept repeating, "She wouldn't leave," like he couldn't understand it himself. The police had stopped the search and closed the case, but Mark wasn't ready to accept that. I asked him to come into the office and to bring any documents or reports he had. When he showed up, I could see how worn down he was. His clothes were creased, his eyes tired with dark circles beneath them, the image of a man who was completely sleep-deprived. "The police think she left on her own," Mark explained, "but that's not like Claire. Something's wrong, and I need to find out what. I need her to come home." It was obvious Mark had not seen this coming. I always start by asking questions. I wanted to know what Claire was like before she disappeared. I could tell Mark enjoyed talking about Claire, hearing the pride in his voice. He told me she was happy, always busy with her art, but then she started to become distant and quiet. It definitely didn't sound right. People don't just change suddenly. After Mark left, I sat down with Kirk, my colleague. After bringing him up to date, he sat in silence for a while, thinking it through. 4 months is a long time to be gone, he finally said. We need to find her. Kirk started digging into her social media and emails, anything that could give us some clues. He's good at that, really good, though I don't like to remind him too often. While Kirk worked, his face buried in the screen, I began reaching out to her friends and family. I left multiple messages, and the people I got through to weren't saying much. Everyone seemed to be holding back, only giving vague answers. It felt like no one wanted to talk. That didn't sit right with me. Then, I finally got something useful while talking to one of Claire's work friends. She was scared, her friend said. "Scared of what?" I asked. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He could be controlling," she continued, but then stopped mid-sentence. I tried gently pushing for more, but she froze. Damn, I thought. But at least it was a start. It was enough to make me wonder if Mark was hiding something. Was this going to be more than just a missing person? Kirk's digging eventually paid off. After going through public records, contacts, and combing through Claire's online presence, we found a potential lead, a man named Jason. He was middle-aged, large build, balding slightly on top. It seemed he had crossed paths with Claire around the time she disappeared. Mark hadn't mentioned anyone by that name. This was a new development. Investigators have a lot of ways to track someone down. We start with the basics, asking questions, checking social media, looking into bank records, and searching for any kind of online trail. People often leave digital breadcrumbs without even realizing it, and that's what we're skilled at following. It's about connecting the dots, one by one, until you complete the picture. With Jason now on our radar, it was time to take a closer look. We kept tabs on him, using simple but effective surveillance techniques, observing his movements, where he went, who he met with, while Kirk continued digging into his background, checking for criminal records or anything suspicious that might explain his connection to Claire. One night, I overheard Jason talking to someone, and that's when things started to shift. "She was desperate," he said. "I did what needed to be done." Was he talking about Claire? Had she gotten herself into something far bigger than we had first imagined? With Jason as our lead, we dug deeper. Surveillance isn't like the movies. It's a game of precision. You have to choose the right spots, watch from multiple angles, and make sure you're invisible. Patience is the key. For days, we followed Jason's every move. It was slow, painstaking work, but that's what gets results in our line of business. Eventually, I had enough to confront him. Jason was sitting in a bar when I decided to approach, glad I ditched the typical black surveillance gear, opting for a more casual look. When I sat down across from him, I could see the tension in his eyes. "What do you want?" Jason asked, clearly on edge. I told him we were looking for Claire. At first, he tried to act like he didn't know her, but after explaining all we had heard and seen, he admitted he had helped her. "She wanted to get away," he said. Jason told us that Claire had gotten herself into a bad situation and needed help to escape. He didn't give us all the details, but enough to find what we were looking for. With Jason's clues, we found a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It was raining when we got there. I knocked on the door, unsure of what we'd find. The door opened slowly. It was Claire. She looked nothing like the woman in the pictures Mark had shown us. Her hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked scared, tired, and a shiny purple bruise on her cheekbone. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Why are you here?" I told her we were there to help, that Mark was worried about her. She hesitated, asking if Mark was with us. After telling her he wasn't and calming her down, she eventually let us in. Claire explained that she had been running from Mark. "I thought I could handle it," she said, "but I was wrong." We explained how worried everyone was and that her parents were heartbroken. Claire agreed to go to the police, but as we were leaving, I noticed someone standing outside, just a few feet away from the door. I couldn't see much through the rain, but there was no mistaking that figure. "Who's that?" I asked Kirk, already feeling my pulse quicken. "It's Mark," Kirk muttered. He was standing there, still as a statue, his face barely visible in the dim light. But as soon as Claire stepped out, everything changed. Mark rushed toward us, not walking, sprinting. "Claire!" he shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "Where have you been? What the hell is going on?" Claire flinched, backing into me, her body trembling. Without even thinking, I stepped in front of her, putting myself between them. I could feel her panic behind me, her breath quickening, her hands gripping the back of my coat. "Mark, you need to back off," I said firmly, trying to keep control of the situation. But it wasn't working. He ignored me completely, his eyes locked on Claire, wild with desperation. "You left me. You just ran away and didn't say a damn word. Do you know what you've done? Do you know how worried I've been?" His voice wasn't full of concern. It was full of anger. I'd heard it before, that tone, the sound of control slipping away, the fury of someone who feels entitled. Claire tried to speak, her voice small and shaky. "Mark, You're coming home." Mark's voice boomed over hers, drowning her out. He took another step forward, fists clenched, and I could see the rage building in him, his face twisting. "Do you have any idea how this looks? Running off like that, like I don't even exist." "Mark," I shouted, finally grabbing his attention. "Back off, now." For a second he froze, his eyes darting between me and Claire. But it didn't last long. The anger flared up again, and this time he turned on me. "Who the hell do you think you are?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the rain. "This is my wife. This is my family. You've got no right to interfere." "She doesn't want to go with you, and you need to respect that," he scoffed, the sound bitter, almost mocking. "Respect? Respect? She's my wife. She's not going anywhere without me." Claire was shaking now, her voice barely a whisper. "Mark, please, just leave me alone." But Mark wasn't listening. He wasn't hearing anything but the sound of his own frustration, his need to control the situation. I could see it in his eyes, the entitlement, the fury. He was used to getting his way. "You think you can just walk away?" he roared, taking another step closer. "You think you can just run from me?" I put my hand up, blocking his path. "She's not going anywhere with you, Mark." For a moment, he just stared at me, breathing hard, the rain pouring down on us. Then, he exploded. "You think you're protecting her? You don't know anything. You don't know what she's like, what we've been through." His voice cracked, a mix of anger and something close to desperation. "She belongs with me. She's mine." The word mine echoed through the street, and I knew right then that there was no reasoning with him. You don't own her, I said, my voice steady. She's not yours. Mark's face twisted in fury. He lunged toward me, but I stood my ground. Mark! Stop! Claire cried out, but it was too late. His hand shot out, grabbing at my jacket, trying to pull me aside. I pushed him back, hard. Back off, Mark, I barked, my voice louder now, leaving no room for negotiation. He staggered, glaring at me like I'd committed some personal offence. This isn't over, he growled, but his tone had shifted. More desperate, less sure of himself. Claire, don't do this. Just a quick reminder. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. It costs nothing, but it really helps us out and shows that you're enjoying the content. Your support keeps us going, so thanks for listening. And now, back to the story. But Claire wasn't listening anymore. She was done. Her trembling had stopped, replaced by something else. Resolve. She stepped out from behind me, her voice steady but quiet. Mark, it's over. You need to go. For a moment, he just stared at her, his face unreadable. And then the anger melted away. He looked smaller, defeated, his shoulders slumping under the weight of it all. Without another word, he turned and walked away into the rain, disappearing down the street. Claire let out a long, shaky breath, her body visibly relaxing as Mark disappeared into the rain. For the first time since we arrived, I saw her shoulders drop, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her. You're safe, I said, my voice gentle, but there was still tension in the air. It was a momentary relief, but I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Claire nodded, but I could see it in her eyes. She was scared, still shaken. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. He's not going to let this go, is he? I didn't want to lie to her. Probably not, I admitted. But you've done the right thing. You're taking control, and that's the first step. She hugged her arms around herself, looking down at the ground, her breath steadying. I thought I could handle it, she muttered. I thought if I just stayed quiet, he'd stop, that things would get better. I shook my head. People like him don't stop, Claire. They just take more and more until there's nothing left. She stared into the distance for a moment, letting my words sink in, and then, with a sudden burst of determination, she straightened up. I need to get out of here, she said, her voice firmer now. I need to go to my parents. Good idea, I replied. We'll take you. The ride to her parents' house was quiet, apart from for the soft rumble of the rain against the car. Claire sat in the back seat, staring out the window, lost in thought. I could feel the tension easing from her, but I also knew that a part of her was still afraid of what might come next. When we arrived, her parents were already outside, waiting on the porch, their faces full of worry. As soon as they saw Claire step out of the car, they rushed down the steps, their arms wide open. Mum, Dad, Claire whispered, her voice trembling, and just like that, she collapsed into their embrace. Tears streamed down their faces, and for a moment, I couldn't help but feel the lump in my throat. I looked away, giving them their moment, but I stayed close, just in case. After a while, Claire's mother turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for bringing her home. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. Watching their reunion, the raw relief in their embrace, reminded me why I did this job, why I kept going, even when it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. We stayed for a while, making sure Claire was settled in. Her father spoke quietly to her as her mother fussed, making tea, blankets, anything to make her feel safe again. As we got ready to leave, Claire caught my arm, her grip surprisingly firm. Paul, she said, her voice steady now but soft. Thank you. For everything. I don't think I could have done this without you. I gave her a small smile. You're stronger than you think, Claire. You did this, not me. She looked down for a moment, then back up at me, her eyes clearer than they had been all night. I don't want to be afraid anymore. You won't be, I promised. This is your fresh start. We left her with her family, the warmth of their home standing in stark contrast to the storm that raged outside. As we drove back, the rain finally began to ease, and I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind her. A few weeks later, Claire called. I was glad I was there to answer. Thank you, she said, her voice steady and hopeful. I've left my old life behind and moved in with my parents. I finally feel free. She went on to explain how she had been trapped, how Mark had always treated her like she was something he owned, someone he could control. It was never love, she said, and I could hear the clarity in her voice now. It was always about power. Her words lingered with me long after the call ended. Claire was free, but I knew the scars would take time to heal. Still, she was on the right path, and that was what mattered. This case would stick with me for a long time, a reminder that sometimes the people we trust the most can be the ones who hide the darkest secrets. But Claire had found her way out. She had reclaimed her life. In the end, everything comes to light. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We hope you found the story engaging. As always, names and locations have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. If you, or someone you know, are in need of professional investigative services, please don't hesitate to visit southwalesprivateinvestigations.co.uk. We're here to help when you need us the most, and once again, thank you for your support. We truly appreciate it.